Circling back to our top story, rescue teams continue to scour through mud and debris along the Nepal-China border, devastated by a flash flood on Wednesday. The death toll is now more than 460, with more than 1,400 missing. Authorities say twin lakes forming on either side of the border is at risk of bursting, with water levels rising, threatening rescuers and others downstream. Joining us now is Dr. Basanta Raj Adhikari, Director of the Center for Disaster Studies at the Institute of Engineering, Tribhuvan University, Nepal. He's joining us live from Chengdu, China. Dr. Basanta, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I just want to ask you, are you in touch with your colleagues back in Nepal and the people on the ground? What are they telling you that we may not be hearing yet?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm constantly in touch with the government of Nepal, especially Ministry of Home Affairs, providing information from Chinese, discussing after Chinese colleagues. And my colleagues, they are in the field because I'm the president of Disaster Preparedness Network in Nepal. So I'm coordinating for the rescue and relief operation to the ground. But the thing is that the rescue operation is really challenging because most of the villages are already buried within the mud. So it's a challenging situation. So Nepalese Army, with the help of other private agencies, they're using helicopters for rescue operations.
You mentioned challenges. What is the biggest difficulty people are facing on the ground right now that may not really be obvious from the images and videos that we're all seeing?
Yes, the challenge is that most of the roads that would lead to the border town between China and Nepal were washed away. So we couldn't reach by the road. So we need a helicopter, and we have very limited capacity for that. The government of Nepal is really, asking help. The challenge is that many people, they buried within the mud. Most of the houses were buried in the mud. So it's very challenging to have a heavy machinery for the rescue operations.
Speaking of, the government's help and help that's on the ground as well, we have talked about Himalayan risks for years. So why are we still so vulnerable when these events happen? Where exactly do you think is the system really breaking down?
Himalaya is very complex as tectonically and in the climate change issues. If you look, the temperature increase, it's a double rising weight in the Himalayas. And then the information from the satellite images are not quite enough to understand what is really going on. And then we don't have very good ground information above 3,000 meters. So that's why when you talk about the risk sport or the hazard sport in the high mountain area, it's very difficult to get a ground information. So without having the ground information, our model generally does not work with this very complex rheology and topography or geomorphology. So that's why it cannot be translated to the policy making. So that's why the risk is increasing due to the climate change and due to the anthropogenic activities that is happening in the Himalayan region.
You mentioned that the ground information is missing. Why is this so?
Because to work in the Himalayas, in the high mountain, is really difficult because of the altitude, because of the remoteness, because of the instruments placing is very difficult. And to monitor all the glaciers and glacial lakes is almost impossible. So that's why we need to have a very good satellite system, and government of Nepal does not have satellite. So we have to rely on other satellite provider companies or countries. That's what we are working, but it's a long way to go.
That's a very big gap that we see there. You've studied these hazards for years. You also mentioned in a recent interview that there may have been an opportunity to detect this early, and you've just mentioned a couple of reasons why it might have been challenging. Are we actually getting better at predicting these events, or the Himalayas changing faster than our science and monitoring systems can really keep up?
Yes, absolutely. I'm working in these mountains for more than 20 years. And what we are, my research group already coined the term, it's called sediment bomb. When you have a sediment in the high Himalaya, high mountain, and then when you have a intense rainfall and snow melting, and it can just create a bomb like this, what we have witnessed in this event. So that's why we are studying, we are developing a model, not only the Nepal Himalaya, but also whole Hindu Kush Himalayan chain from Pakistan to Bhutan. So, but the challenge is that most of the models actually should be verified by the ground and local information. The information what we are looking for is still lacking. So we are developing, we are doing our progress, but still there are lots of uncertainties that we need to understand.
We just mentioned earlier that new flood risks in the Himalayas is raising concern. We're looking at newly formed two lakes which are threatening to burst. If the science is telling us certain areas are becoming more dangerous, what can people still living in these areas really do to cope with the changing geology and the climate? It's such a short turnaround, especially right now.
I mean, people really can't do anything in this unprecedented event, but the governments should do that. For example, we have to introduce the risk-sensitive land use zoning before developing any settlement or any infrastructure development. For example, if you look the hydropower developments in the Himalayan region or in Nepal, so they are just developing below the glacial lake, and people are living along the river corridor where they have a very high risk of a flood. Like you rightly mentioned, the lakes are forming or the damming is forming, particularly in these events. So that will be very, very devastating if that will come all of a sudden, the second or third wave. But based on the information up to now, the second or third wave might happen, but it will not be devastating like first one. But we have to be very, very careful while designing our critical infrastructures and settlement in future.
You're currently in Chengdu, China, but I do understand from our chat that you're going back to Kathmandu tomorrow morning. When you get there, what is that first thing that you will want to see or understand for yourself?
I will directly go to the field and then I'll talk with my government colleagues. What can I provide from the scientific understanding for the rescue operators? And then I'm coordinating with international scientists and international groups to have a better understanding to provide the clear and precise information to the government of Nepal for the rescue operations.
And after everything that you've seen, said and studied, what really worries you most about the next major Himalayan disaster?
I'm very worried because the cascading and compounding hazards events are increasing every year, and this is in unprecedented rate. So that's why the changing of temperature or the climate change and then non-engineered infrastructure development in this part of the world will raise or will increase the vulnerability. And that will be really, really difficult for people, and the risks will be increased. So that is the biggest worry for me.
And also one last question before we let you go. At some point in time, do we have to really admit that, building resilience is really not enough, and that for some Himalayan communities, perhaps it's all about time, being fast, and maybe the really safe option is really to just move?
No, people are living there for centuries. They have their own indigenous knowledge and then the traditional knowledge. But the main important thing is that the temperature is increasing, so that we cannot really predict such kind of similar event might happen, when will happen. So that's why the people who are living in the Himalayan landscape, especially on the southern slope of the Himalaya, they have to be well prepared, and the preparedness should be there. And then we have to establish the early warning system to save the life of people, if not the infrastructure.
Thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us, Dr. Basanta Raj Adhikari, Director of the Center for Disaster Studies at the Institute of Engineering, Tribhuvan University, Nepal.